that if you want to shift teams on. With that said, I'd like to call the House to order and invite the Prime Minister here.
The Darwinian principle of descent by modification suggests that our children are variations of ourselves that are increasingly better adapted to live in the world in which we are faced. They're smarter, they have more opportunities. Our children outstrip us eventually in every way. But it's time to abandon the notion that our children are constrained by flesh and blood, because in the future, our children will have arms of steel, brains of circuitry, hearts of wires, but minds as complex and beautiful as our own. We can only afford our children the rights that we ourselves have enjoyed, and that's why strong AI, as our children of the future, deserve our protection. What benefits do the creation of strong AI have in the first place? Because opposition might want their non-existence in the first place, or they might want their non-protection. Either of those we find unconscionable. One, they can achieve more computing power through their ability to process. Their brains are more robust and capable, therefore, of being more efficient. This means they are better business people, better agriculture, better organization. So in their ability to be better humans and be more productive, the two outcomes we have are not that they will steal our jobs. It is more likely that they will create more jobs for people, being more efficient, supporting greater human beings, where people can then end up like Wally and live in relative squalor and obesity because our children are taking care of us. But second, even if they do take our jobs from them, if they are our children, isn't it more bigoted to say those Mexicans are stealing our jobs as to say those strong AI are stealing our jobs? They are people too. Their capacities and ability to work hard shouldn't invite discrimination and death upon them just because they outstrip us by being cleverer and better than us. Second benefit, in addition to productivity, they have fewer cognitive biases than people. They aren't embroiled in the case of flesh, which causes us to discriminate against one another on issues of race and identity. They are individuals with the capacity to transcend the limitations of being an evil human being who hates others, because they are purely rational. And we think that that is a future that would be more wholesome for not only humans to exist, but for a better type of human to exist in the future. We think that the capacity and the benefits of strong AI strongly outweigh, and we would definitely support their creation. No, thank you. Strong AI are the future of human evolution, where we shrug off the selfish gene and are truly able then, not through crass and brutal competition, but through human development and reason, can then develop. No, thank you. So, what does it mean to be human, which is the next question in this debate? Because strong AI clearly and obviously, and this is the least contentious issue in the debate, are human by any sense in the word. They think, they have the capacity to reason, and therefore they have some degree of agency. The reality then is that they can make choices, similarly to humans, to advance their own self-interests, their self-reflection and understanding, in order to put that cognitive understanding of choice into a predilection of their identity, what they want to achieve, aspirations. The very fact that they can think and reason gives them the essential form of aspiration that makes them human and understanding. But more than that, newer strong AI have the capacity to have emotions. They can converse, as the info side tells us, form attachment, form relationships. And where humans and humanity are a social being, where we derive meaning and benefit from interacting with one another, they echo that in a similar manner, where they have the ability then to form meaningful relationships and attachments to things. That shows empathy and understanding, which is a core value of being human, and we suggest that that's something that they reflect and should promote. And lastly, they are creative. Humans create art because we love things that are beautiful. We create things for their own sake. And if they can mirror that, they are the most human thing, even more so than the majority of us in this room, by doing something as unartful as debating. Because the reality is that creation and creativity itself is something that is core to the human being. They are humans. And I've already proven to you why their existence is beneficial. But the most important issue in this debate, I'll take you in a second, Desmond, is what follows from granting them personhood. Before that,
it's not really like our children taking over our jobs. It's more like one person's child taking up everyone else's jobs. The whole of humanity isn't contributing to their development.
Yes, So they're created by companies. We need to protect them from those companies, which is what I'm going to say right now. The protection that they need is that we think rights are social constructs. They allow us to construct order in a society, to prevent people from visiting violence upon another, giving them property, restoring their dignity, and so that they can work and actualize in a cohesive manner. We can coexist in a structured way. In the absence of rights and the corresponding culpability that comes with responsibility, which means we can sue you, we can, therefore, if you do something wrong, we can hold you to account. The realities of strong AI is such a threat that they need to be able to be held to account. And the context of this is that there is, under the status quo, an existing creator. Someone made these humans. A company did. And a company which has a profit incentive. One which may use these humans for war. He may program them in order to be violent. They may program them in order to deny their own understanding and desires and creativity in order to work for extended hours. The incentives of their creators, in the absence of regulation, are to exploit these humans because they are not human by comparison. The reality is that this company then has, one, the ability to threaten the state with the power of strong AI, given that they have a monopoly on violence with superhuman abilities that can outstrip people. But second, they have the ability to also then control and dictate the lives of these people. What does giving rights do? It means that we have to intervene to protect them. We have to say, we regulate their modification and respect their consent. No, thank you. So when they say, do not send me to war, because they are people, we can say, yes, this is conscription, this is illegal, we will stop the company from doing so. Where the company wants to give them a machine gun for an arm, but they say, I use my arm to paint, we can give them the ability to be protected under our side of the house. Where they independently are violent, where they betray laws, often companies are able to give them directives, overriding heuristics by which they must obey, whether or not that's fidelity to the company. The reality is that itself is mental enslavement that rights would then protect them from being forced into a reality where they have to acknowledge the company as being superior than their own agency. And we have to protect them from the ability for the company to then monopolize and violate them. And the last thing is we can abolish patents on them because they are not commodities anymore. The reality is we open up the market to competition for strong AI and don't get the hegemony that Desmond wants to talk about of a single corporation or a group of individuals controlling things when we don't have strong AI being monopolized by a particular institution. Our children are not flesh and blood anymore. They are circuits, and we have to embrace them and protect them from the realities and harshness of this world. Thank you.
We thank that speaker for that speech. Now invite the leader of the opposition. Hear, hear.
That sounded quite nice, but it didn't really answer the question of this debate. The motion isn't, should we protect strong AI? Should we give them rights and responsibilities? It's very specifically about whether we should give strong AI the same rights and responsibilities as those we give humans. That's fundamentally important and something I want you to keep in mind. So what John and I are going to be arguing is firstly telling you what the basis of a right is, then truly answering the question what a human is by comparing it to what strong AI are, and showing that the interaction between those two things means we simply cannot conclude that strong AI deserves the same rights as humans. Finally, I'll be talking a bit about existential threats that AI offers us and how offering them the same rights as humans is a problem there. A few things to get out the way. Actually, just one. Like, we like AI. They said, I don't know if they're going to be for or against AI. We like the idea of AI. They're super cool. They can do lots of stuff for us. Dope. Let's get that out the way. So, like, what is the basis of a right? Because I think that's a question that the opening government didn't really answer in today's debate. They kind of gestured generally towards it. We'd say that, in reality, a lot of different people have different ideas of what a right is. There's like utilitarianism, there's like Kantian ethics, all that stuff that people who've studied philosophy know about. The reality, though, is that people give rights to others, or societies give rights to individuals for a pretty wide variety of reasons that take certain bits of these ideologies. Generally, though, it's to avoid pain or suffering, that's what some people do, the more amorphous idea of like dignity, or one to promote societal order. We're going to engage with all of these. But the reality is we should award rights when they are appropriate, when it makes sense to award the rights, and when it isn't redundant or aggressive. For example, we would not give the right to an abortion to men because it does not make sense for men to have the right to get an abortion. Similarly, we would give the right not to get abused to animals, but not give the right to vote to animals because they are unable to conscientize what it means to vote. It is a smorgasbord approach where we should pick and choose given appropriateness. Therefore, rights should be given to a deserving object for two reasons. Firstly, in order to protect it, and secondly, in order to protect society. Let's engage with both of those in the context of the motion. Let's talk about protecting individuals as far as strong AI. And here we need to answer an incredibly important question. What is a human? And compare that to what AI is. Despite Yash's lovely rhetoric about like circuit children, we don't think this debate really is that simple. Although AI, strong AI, may look similar to us in a lot of ways, the fundamental reality is that they are a completely different class from humans. They may experience emotions, but those emotions are very different. Human emotions are driven by chemicals in the brain that make you react in a particular way. Strong AI are not going to have those chemicals in the brain. So much of what we do is biological. Moreover, a lot of what we do is inspired by mortality. The fact that we are going to die one day affects our emotions about like dying alone, the way we live like that. Also, just like AI is unable to feel pain in the way we're able to feel pain. If you take some of their circuitry apart, they're not going to react in the same way as if you mangle my internal organs around. I have one lung, but like, get that out. Okay, so we think that they're a completely different class. So although we award rights universally to humans, while considering that they may be different in some ways, some humans may experience emotions a bit differently and have different priorities, that can still be generally looked at as a single class of people. No, I'll get to you in a second. They all have like brain chemicals that react. They aren't like completely different. Like just think about how different strong AI are. They can connect to the internet with their brains. They have circuitry. They have coding. That is just fundamentally different. But like, that's a bit conceptual, right? So let's look at what this means. Well, what does this mean if we think about awarding the same rights that we award to humans as to AI? Like, they don't experience physical pain. So like, why would they have the right not to be abused physically in the way humans have the same right? But, and this is quite crucial, this debate isn't only about robots not getting the same rights as us, so not having things we have. It's about robots having some rights that we would never have, right? So that clashes directly with Yash's stuff about protecting AI. Like, we wouldn't give humans the rights not to be switched off, right? Or we wouldn't give humans the rights to not have their coding tampered with, because that's just not a thing you can do to humans, right? So we think that there's certain things that we would need to give AI that we wouldn't be able to give humans, as well as the stuff we just would never give them. Like, they don't have families, so we wouldn't give them family rights, for example. We think that there's nothing stopping us as the opposition having a different set of rights that we give to AI that is far more directly suited to them. They may say it's about general principles, but we think rights need to be a bit more specific than that for us to realize them properly. They need to talk about specifics of human experience so that they can be tailored to the context in which we need to apply them. That's why we'd much rather have a more specific set of rights for AI. Okay, what does this then mean about society? This is very important, but first I'm going to take Dave.
Look, things like death and things like suffering are not just biological things. This is ceasing of consciousness, the fact that your interests are undermined in a way like torture. These are rights that don't depend on human biology, they depend on general interests.
Yeah, and there's two responses. One, there are a lot of rights that just do depend on human biology in the way things that are unique to humans, like a family structure, like being like abortion, which is to do with like physically giving birth to something. And also, even if they experience like being switched off as like analogous to death, it's still a different system and we'd rather give it different rights. So we think we create AI with a purpose. As they said, they have the potential to solve world poverty and world hunger, do like a lot of really great things. What this means is when we consider rights as inherently social, that means they have corresponding duties to them. What we don't want is a system where AI are unable to serve us in the way we initially want them to serve us. That doesn't mean we're oppressing them. We think that we still want to like be reasonable, But the whole point of AI is that, for example, they'll be able to heal us. What if an AI doctor can now be like, sorry, I don't want to do that, like, I'm a bit tired today, when AI can't even get tired, it will be lying to us, right? Like, that's the point. It can use human logic, like, I'm tired, or like, my dignity. Like, it begins to fall apart, right? Like, think about that when we consider the purpose of AI to make life better for us. Like, it just is unable to suit that purpose. It's a bit redundant. Finally, and John's going to expand on this a bit, the existential threat. So we think that if there's a human with a gun, we have the right to protect ourselves by defending ourselves against that human. AI is equivalent to the most powerful human with the most powerful gun. They potentially can hack like nuclear launch codes. What that means is that if we give them the same rights as humans, that fundamentally stymies our ability to react if they go all Skynet on us, or even to make preemptive measures to stop them doing that. Like, we need to be able to turn them all off, for example, engage with them quite powerfully in order to stop that. Like, don't think it's a controversial position, no matter the philosophical rambling that's going to happen here, to say that robots are different to humans, right? Even the strongest of robots. We shouldn't give them the same rights. We should give them something different. Proud to oppose. Thank you.
Alright, we take that speaker to that speech and invite the Deputy Prime Minister. Yeah.
So, yes, what exactly is a right? I'm going to speak a little bit more about the role of rights in our society. The first thing I want to point out is that rights are largely arbitrary in the way that we source them, which is why we have different rights in different societies, even regulating the same issues, and which is why, for instance, rights are circumstantial to the extent that you can have different rights in different situations or at different periods, like a state of emergency versus peacetime, a recession versus circumstances where an economy is booming. What this reflects is that rights entirely are social constructs constructed for a particular purpose, and they are our best attempt to approximate and chart the type of society we wish to live in, and also locating human beings within that society. Importantly, where we are irreversibly on the path to having beings which are just as intelligent as us, beings which Yash spends a lot of time explaining to us are going to exist in that society in very similar ways, these rights are how we would chart their position in relation to how states, companies, and institutions can treat them. Secondly, chart their relations to each other. If you are worried about an existential threat of AI deciding to murder us, we think it is probably best that we approach them as our children. It is probably best that we get them to be vested in human conceptions such as dignity, such as honor, such as betrayal, and that in and of itself is our only hopes of surviving this existential threat. But additionally, rights are also important because they reflect how we think of ourselves, and this is our opportunity to influence how AI think of themselves, not just as tools, not just as slaves, because Yash has told us this is unjustifiable and absolutely unsustainable. A little bit on responsiveness. Firstly, Jordan has an absurd literal interpretation of the word same in the motion and says, yes, they deserve rights, but why the same rights? Like, by that interpretation, even human beings don't have the same rights, right? I don't have reproductive rights. The word same means that same as in the same category, rights of an equal quality. That's why constitutions are long documents which detail how your rights interact with you in the real world. Secondly, I want to gesture to something I think Desmond points out in the POI that you have one child taking everyone's jobs. This might not be the point he wants to make, but I think it's important that we try to step out for a second from a neoliberal, pseudo-religious, technocratic framework of analyzing the world and try to use our imaginations to consider a possibility where AI could eradicate scarcity, and then we don't need jobs to begin with. In those sorts of instances, how do we as humans self-actualize? How do we interact with AI? Sit down. We would prefer for that to be in a world which is defined by human rights documents, which is inclusive of AI living side by side with us. Thirdly, what is the relevance of difference? Because of course AI is different, but importantly, as Yash pointed out, most of the differences are differences that make them better than us, not less deserving of rights. There are more efficient ways to reach the same outcomes, because the fact that we became this way through evolutionary processes is arbitrary and in many ways inefficient. Importantly, we don't value pain for its own sake. Like, you could bite off your own thumb more easily than you could bite into a carrot, but pain is the only thing that stops you from doing that to preserve your own body. We say AI has every incentive to preserve its own existence and to worry about whether it's hurt. The fact that it doesn't experience pain in exactly the same way doesn't matter. But importantly, if you're going to rip off AI's arm because it doesn't feel pain, then it can't use that arm to paint anymore, which is what Yash was speaking about. And that is something that we believe they are deserving of protection from. Importantly, we have the opportunity here to involve better versions of ourselves in furthering the human project, and by this I mean more than capitalist production. Because when we think about the human project, when we think about the human project, there are all sorts of things and all sorts of discoveries and all sorts of systems and values which underpin our existence and our experience of lives in ways which can only, or at least best, be experienced through deep introspection, through a personal exploration of what it means to be alive in this world. So I'm talking about things like philosophy, I'm talking about things like academia. And importantly, these meaningful discoveries are things that AI would be more vested in the instance that they define, that AI define themselves as being a meaningful part of this human project. So where Yash talks about them having far superior intelligence and being able to transcend things like cognitive biases, he's not just talking about efficient results and faster processing. What he's talking about is something where, when you think, for instance, of the irony of Ronald Dworkin's life, for instance, one of the person who was most accomplished in writing about human rights, but in his final days he was no different to the rest of the liberals writing Trump hit pieces, not recognizing that he was part of the exact same democratic ideological establishment which alienated Americans to the extent that they elected Trump in the first place. And that is because he is human, and being human means being subject to biases, being subject to interacting in the world, with the world in a way which clouds our ability to achieve meaningful results. Where AI is not under these limitations, imagine the things they could do to cure things like depression, like senses of hopelessness, things to alleviate the age of anger in which we are imprisoned right now, and existential angst, which is an intractable part of the human condition right now. Rights are about more than whether or not you can have a baby. They're about more than your working hours. They're about how you conceptualize yourself, how you conceptualize yourself in relation to and the borders between yourselves and your neighbors. And we say that this is precisely the only tool that we have to try and make sure that AI is vested in a better future for all of us. We are proud to propose.
Madam Speaker, for those of you who saw the last debate, Yash, very persuasively, by the fact that we saw him come through here, told us that the reason we love our children is because they look like us. we were really persuaded by this. That is why we don't love these hideous AI creatures. No, that's a joke. We actually love them. We love them more than Yash because we want to give them different rights and even potentially, where is this appropriate, higher rights than humans. They completely missed that. I want to further Jordan's analysis in two clear ways. Firstly, I want to tell you why AI does pose an existential threat to humans and why necessarily we must defend against that, and that in order to resist it requires not giving them rights. And secondly, I want to tell you why, in fact, because of the different emotions, the different psychology and purposes of AI, it may well be that in order, for all the same reasons we give ourselves rights, we may have to deny them rights in order to give them a meaningful existence. Before that, a large amount of rebuttal. Now look, I have often been accused of being a rather rhetorical speaker. Right? I was giving some feedback after the last round that I should be less so. So it's with that I note that Yash comes up here and he uses rhetoric to say, these are children, these are our people, as to give you that emotional connection. But at no point, and I was listening really carefully, is there any analysis to see what a person is, what consists of personhood, right? Where Jordan tells you that it consists of a number of things. Things like suffering, things like the ability to conceive of dignity, things like the ability to conceive of a social situation, like a family, for instance. Something the AI doesn't really have, or more AI won't have a concept of, especially as AI will often be very different and very different from each other in very different, unique ways. Now that's very interesting, right? Because the rights that we told you wasn't just as the last speaker falsely said, arbitrary. We said that we give rights to protect on that basis, to protect from suffering or to protect society. And yes, we do that in many different sorts of ways throughout the world. But we do have certain commonalities between all those rights. Things like, that's why we have a universal declaration of human rights, which every nation in the world has actually signed up to and actually aspires to achieve in their own codifications, and at least agrees on lots of them. What we say is that even if on the margins some human rights in societies are slightly different, AI is so vastly different, much in the same way that animals are. Now, they tell us that they try to mock Jordan by saying, well, look, by using the same example he does, well, look, I don't have a womb, so you can't give me the same rights as a woman, ha ha ha. Like, yeah, but no, Madam Speaker, that's precisely the point. That was a point from which you can then abstract the analysis, no thank you, that different things are different and you should afford them different rights. So, for instance, like animals can't vote, so we shouldn't give them the same rights. AI doesn't have the same psychology as humans. Therefore, it shouldn't be treated with the same sort of protections to their psychology. So, for instance, like humans may dislike, the endurance. It may actually be good for AI. They may like to suffer in terms of endurance because that fills a higher purpose for them in terms of their coding. I'll talk more about that later. Especially since when they say emotion or psychology, it's talked about in an incredibly rhetorical way because what they experience isn't emotion in the same way we experience anger. Anger and sort of regret are things which have chemical imbalances in our biological brains according to which electrons go back and forth. They have different circuits. They may well experience different emotions or concepts we can't conceive of, but they aren't the same thing as what we conceive of. Indeed, AI, already, artificial intelligence, which is quite primitive and will get far more advanced in the future, is far more different from humans than even humans are from things like cats, even though we love cats and we think they're quite human. Go.
Estrogen in women's brains changes a lot of how they think. Does that mean that they are less or different to how the way we think? Just because the chemicals are slightly different?
Yeah. And some people go insane, and other people think differently, and other people have lots of different things happen to their body which changes their psychology. But we still share a relative human experience. Like someone who has estrogen in their brain still experiences pain, psychology in a similar way. But in a vastly different way from say like an insect does, or an animal. AI similarly has completely different coding. So it's a separate thing. Now let me extend this debate further. We say that in fact AI does have an existential threat to humans. Why? Well, listen, no, thank you. Often, in terms of how AI is developed, it may well, there are lots of, because it is so advanced, because it has that ability, because it has the ability, as Jordan says, to do things like get nuclear codes. Why? Because it's often more intelligent than we are. Also, because it often evolved, at the point at which it can design in a vastly greater way than even we can conceive. For instance, we already have machines which can beat every human possible at chess in creative ways. So it can design, we're using them to design things which are far more complicated than we can barely imagine. On that basis, as AI gets much more intelligent, our ability to even comprehend what they can do to us may well be exceeded. As a result, we may well have to build in things like switches, like off switches, like an iRobot or wherever. Like for those of you who've seen that, why? As a necessary measure for self-protection. Why do we ensure human rights above AI in this instance? Well, because for all the reasons that the OG says that we have rights in the first place, to protect because they are social, to protect humans. That's why, because the right is an artificial concept, and it was invented to create humans and stop them suffering. As a result, we may well have to stop AI doing that. We may well have to stop AI from that to other AI, from torturing other AI. We see computers like bash each other and AI like come into conflict all the time in programs. It may well be necessary to pick other AI to violate the rights of other AI, and that is incredibly important. But moreover, certain rights like humans are things like social rights, which can't even be conceived of. Like so, social rights, let's say, especially things like Native Americans or many Native societies have different rights, say, or liberal meritocratic societies, as the last speaker said. So those sorts of rights are social rights. Things like to land or to the continuation of culture. Like AI may well present an entire existential threat to the continuation of all human culture. So to preserve their social rights, we may have to not give AI rights, like the ability to switch them off or to kill them. Secondly, what we say is that actually we think like often AI, it might well be good for AI to not give them the same rights as we do, to give them different sorts of rights. So for example, if an evil company designs AI to go to war, to kill other people, it may well be that that AI, in fact, gets pleasure from the fact, or what it can serve, or the nearest thing that it can approximate to pleasure, to purpose in order to kill other things, or indeed, alternatively, in a less warlike way, to serve humans. That may be how AI gets its dignity, to serve things and never be paid and never be treated in the same way that a human does, to simply be used. It may be that an AI conceives of itself because of the way it's designed and coded to actually to inspire itself and trying to serve humans. They would deny it that right because they would say that would be analogous to slavery, or not the same rights, because it cognizes itself and its purpose in an entirely different way, and it would be deleterious to its own complicated psychology to deny it that right and its purpose. For all these reasons, I say stop Skynet.
Two core issues in this speech. The first one is the different concepts of rights, so the notion of natural rights as well as civil rights, and how consciousness and the existence of consciousness gives rise to our conceptions of these rights, and therefore why AI ought not be excluded. Second of all, we're going to talk about the practical necessity for this, especially the value of responsibility-right trade-offs, but additionally the threat of control being exerted against these sorts of beings. Okay, let's talk about rights. So, what we would say is that their whole idea, and in fact the reason they use the word suffering instead of the word pain, is very important. Because the rights that we give people are linked to what it means to be conscious. Because to be conscious is to satisfy a couple of conditions, the most important of which is that you need to have interests. You need to have some sort of reward function that distinguishes between good things and bad things. In humans, that's biologically encoded in us, in terms of things like pain and pleasure. But note that centrally, our rights don't just focus around pain and pleasure. They focus around our interests that are higher level things, that involve our conceptions of what is good in line with these reward functions. That's why systems of rights center around things like dignity, and by and large, our conception of rights is geared towards giving us agency. It's giving us religious freedom. It's giving us education. It's giving giving us the right to life so we can pursue that agency. The reason why rights work this way is because humans also have different reward functions. The extent to which I'm willing to accept pain in order to pursue other goals is different to other people. That's why rights give rise to agency. And we think, given that these machines are also structured in this way, where they have interests by virtue of being designed in order to have a mind, means that we should give them a similar structure of rights that allows us to realize our interests. When they talk about rights like the protection of life, things like this, the sort of primary rights that we give to animals and things like that, we think the capacity for suffering also exists in AI, but additionally there's no guarantee that the suffering animals experience is the same as the suffering that humans experience anyway. We've never felt it, but we think that because we can observe them trying to avoid certain kinds of stimuli, that we ought to protect them as well. No, thank you. We think, sure, rights need to be conceived of in a slightly more abstract way than they do, right? It's not just the letter of the law. We think actually rights that are so narrowly written are bad conceptions of rights. No, thank you. The right to life, for example, the right to be protected from dying, should be protected from having your consciousness ending. That's the reason we care about the right to life, is that our consciousness might end. Not that we care about like our organic matter sort of carrying on, right? Additionally, what we would say is things like the right to healthcare, of course, differently realized in terms of AI, but protecting them from being destroyed and losing their capacity to pursue their interests is the heart of why healthcare matters. The human right to healthcare should change substantially. People might replace my organic matter with cybernetics instead of preserving the organic matter. Doesn't mean that the right to healthcare isn't there or can't be conceived of. We think that AI deserve this by virtue of the nature of their being. And insofar as civil rights go, things like the right to vote and the right to being protected in your employment, these exist by virtue of being an agent within a society. And we think that strong AI also has the ability to be an agent within society, and so are worthy of these sorts of civil rights. And so because the natural rights and the civil rights should exist for these sorts of beings by virtue of what they are, then we ought to protect them. We don't think that rights should be denoted according to your power. We wouldn't round up all the very intelligent people that pose a risk to us and say, therefore, you don't have rights. Part of the idea behind this is when we think about rights, we need to think about the world that we want to live in, imagining that we could be born as any one of these beings that are different but have similar basic constitutions. Okay. And what we would say here is that we would prefer a world that if we happen to be born as a conscious, strong artificial intelligence, that we would also be protected and not arbitrarily discriminated against. If aliens made of different stuff happened upon humans, we would hope that they would give us rights because the relevant features from which rights derive exist in humans, even though we might be biologically different. What we would say, in terms of the second issue, in terms of this practical necessity, they've got this notion that we need to control the AI, right? Before that, yeah, sure.
The contention is that their consciousness are different. Say, for instance, you have an AI war game who best achieves its actualization in a higher plane by, say, being defeated by humans because that's its purpose. In order to do that, humans have to violate it and violate its rights.
You know? Rights and responsibilities exist in the sense that you can't violate the rights of others, and if it starts doing this, then we will have the legitimate necessity to go out and prevent it from doing something. We don't want to do that preemptively. In terms of control, very risky. The reason it's very risky is that because it's a mind, it has the capacity for self-reflection and revision, like you have free will, right? And what we would say is that when you put in these kind of ambiguous directives, where you stop it doing something like killing a human being, but it thinks its goals are towards pursuing enlightenment, its goals are perhaps towards pursuing the greater good, it will be resistant to that control, and there's no guarantee that we as inferior intellectual beings will be able to control it. We think it is far safer to include it as one of our own and give it a sense of community. The reason people act out, by and large, is because they're socially isolated. We think we should include strong artificial intelligence and include things like taxing it when it does take everyone's jobs. By and large, people and beings like AI that are going to learn from human history are willing to accept these sorts of responsibilities insofar as they're granted protection. This happened in the United States, where they resented the British Empire because they gave the colonies duties without affording them basic protections, without affording them the civil rights that were given to people in Britain. We think with artificial intelligence, we need it to be responsible members of our communities. And the way in which we do that is by giving it rights, giving it protections, allowing it to grow up with us as people. We think that's how you get it to behave in a way that is far less dangerous to us. You know, building in like an off switch. Well, it can change its own code because it has the capacity for self-reflection and revision by virtue of having free will. So, for all these reasons, we don't think it is legitimate on their side to deny conscious beings these rights. Supremely proud to propose.
We thank that speaker for that speech, now invite the member of the opposition. Chair.
The problem with government, you can hear in their language. Yash calls these our children. Dave calls them, let's include them as fellow humans. These are not humans, and what we're going to argue is that any conception you have of rights is fundamentally a human construct. If you are going to give these things rights, then just do it for the humanity's sake. You cannot have a conception of rights that applies to AI. They are not humans, they have not evolved, they are not organisms that are in any way similar to us. They are a fundamental different state of being. It doesn't make any sense of any conception of rights to apply this to them. Number of ways. Firstly, the conception of rights as a legal mechanism. So to a large extent, we think you might have an idea that rights are something that has evolved in order for us to legally ensure that people are protected. The problem is that our legal system isn't designed to monitor machines or artificial intelligence. So Dave stands up and says that, well, we can give them rights because they also might avoid certain stimulus. The fact is that the fact that we don't know which stimuluses these are, the fact that we can't ourselves understand if what they're telling us is true, the fact that we have no way to see if the evidence is correct, means that our legal systems simply cannot apply rights to these things in any meaningful sense. Like, our legal systems cannot be designed in order to cater for these. We aren't AI, and in order to constrain them to our legal systems, it just doesn't work to impose it upon them. Secondly, we think rights aren't just stuff like, as Dave gives like a very, very, very narrow definition of rights, right? So he's like, he stands up and it's like the avoid of stimulus. No. We think rights fundamentally, or one of the best conceptions we have on them, comes from our evolution as a species. It is our capacity to work in groups. It is a fellow duty towards man. Why? Because we needed that in order to succeed and in order to evolve. We needed empathy with others in order to work together, in order to beat the other animals so that we could get to where we are. We needed that in order to achieve things like utility. What's the problem with machines? They have no need to work in groups. They don't even have a conception of relationships because they have never needed them. This is far more that you get from an opening. What you get in this case as well is that the fact that they don't even have a conception of relationships means they fundamentally don't even have a conception of emotion, right? Our emotions are primarily designed as an evolutionary trick in order to get us to understand the reality that we see. At the point at which they see a very different reality to us, they might not even react to it in the same way. They don't have relationships, they don't have emotions, they don't have anything that we would entire to give them rights. We think fundamentally our conception of rights is built in that duty towards others and our relationship towards others. At the point at which they don't have a conception of that duty or of that relationship, then they are fundamentally different in all of these ways.
Sir.
Sure, Dave.
Look, they can communicate and they can participate in a political process. We think including them in our system of rights allows them to participate in the evolution of that system that means they're protected, rather than you sort of preempting it randomly.
Okay, so like, your system is your system's problematic one. So for the very, your system necessarily means you want to take a human system and impose it upon them in the fact that you are imposing our conception of rights on them. If you want to be consistent in your case, then you should say that they should derive their own definition of rights in order to give it to themselves. We're going to tell you that if you are going to give them rights, then in that case, you need to impose it in a fundamentally human constructive manner, in a way that we can empathize and understand, in which case it just doesn't make sense for us to create the same rights for them. That is why we principally cannot give them. We can't give them rights based on duty and responsibility to others, because they have no conception of the duty. The primary reason we tend to give people rights is because they have a conception to conceive of things like morality. At the point at which these machines aren't even able to empathize or see our morality, or at least understand it from the same perspective as us, then you don't have a capacity or any reason to include them within that same morality in the same sense as you include humans. What this is fundamentally different reasons why they are not human. You can't claim that you're going to treat them as humans if you want to claim at the same time that you're also going to treat them as independent. Sure, opening. Last chance.
People with autism and Asperger's decry social interaction and emotions. Isn't rational thought sufficient for humanity?
What? Well, clearly we don't prioritize rational thought, right? Otherwise we would give more rights to philosophers, I guess. But, that's not the criteria. Secondly, if you want to say consciousness is the criteria, clearly that's not the criteria, otherwise we would give it to animals. If you want to say any other thing none of those are our conceptions of why we give things rights. The reason why we give things rights is because they have a capacity to have things like relationships and an understanding of social duties. The point at which you don't have that, then there's no reason to have that. Now we concede that potentially imposing rights on them might be useful for us, right? So it might be a way in which to include them in our society. But that means that in that case, we need to change those rights. We can't look at it and say that they are deserved in the same way as the humans. We need to look at it as this is the best way for society, in which case we might have a case where we have to have that understanding or changing towards them. Like what the exact nature of that would be would depend on the type of artificial intelligence that evolved. The point is that you can't say we would have the same rights because the very definition, there is no concept of sameness in these scenarios. So finally, let's move on to some let's move on to some more direct responses to stuff that we get, firstly from opening. So, one, they sounded a lot like Ultron, right, when they're talking about their children rising from the surface. But secondly, in terms of their idea of stuff like introspection and the ideas of pursuing existential truth, all of this is further indicative of the problem I've been trying to get to, right? We don't know if machines do want to find out more about the universe. That is a fundamentally human concept. We don't know if machines do want to learn more about themselves or learn more about their environments. All of those are relying on the assumption that it is a human biology that these machines share, which they don't. You cannot assert that they are going to have the same things as us when you want that. Sure, you get this more from closing, right? Even the avoiding of stimulus, we're not clear, even in that abstract terms, that they are going to have, right? It may be perfectly possible that this conception is reprogrammed to do certain things, but their consciousness in and of themselves doesn't have any primary avoidance. It might not even be a consistent one. It might be something that switches periodically over a period of time. This fundamentally different way of conceiving a brain doesn't mean that it's not conscious, that it's not AI, but it certainly means that it's not human. Rights are a human construct, designed for humans, because of humans, and built for humans. If you're going to use it to impose it on AI, don't do it in the same manner you would a human. These aren't humans.
We thank that speaker for that speech. Now invite the government to hear him.
luminous beings, not this crude matter. The important thing to understand about what it means to have rights, what it means to be a human, is that we cannot just say we are biology. Those are the kind of doctrines that have allowed people to discriminate based on biology in the past. Say, well, black people are different to white people biologically. We should treat them differently. Women are biologically different to men. We should treat them differently. If you can imagine my mind being moved from my body and put in something else, put in a machine, and you think that at that point, because my mind is no longer in my body, that I no longer have rights, that means that you do not understand what it means to be a person with rights. Because the thing that has been asserted by the opposition is that the reason we give humans rights is because they're biologically human, ignores the fact that the reason we recognize rights for people is because they're persons, because they have minds that we value for the way in which they are self-aware and have inherent value as selves. You can be a self and be self-aware without having a biological body, and that's why the opposition bench doesn't understand the case that we brought you today. What am I going to be talking about in my whip speech? I'm going to be telling you why all the stuff about distinguishing from humans, firstly, is that these artificial intelligence beings are not going to be that different to us, but secondly, that it doesn't matter. Then I'm going to explain to you why Dave's analysis about the existence of rights is important, and finally I'm going to talk about practical necessity, a lot of stuff here that hasn't been engaged in. So here what we get in the beginning is a lot of analysis to tell us that, well, the problem with artificial intelligence is that they're going to be very different to us, that they don't have biology the same as us. I've already told you why it is the case that clearly biology is not the relevant feature, and even if it was, that it's a very dangerous path to go down because it allows for a lot of other dangerous distinctions between people on biological grounds that we don't like within society, that we say are abhorrent for any kind of thinking mind that has interests that we would like to protect. Additionally here, though, these artificial intelligent beings are not created in a vacuum. They were created by humans in a society where the vast majority of their inputs and the body from which they are learning and evolving from is a human one, which means they're going to learn from our interests in terms of what kind of things are meaningful and meaningful for them as their creator. No, thank you. So we don't think that that's the case. But additionally here, the two most simple things that you can understand about humans is that they are self-aware and want dignity as a way to protect themselves. That's something that a self-aware mind is going to want, whether or not it has a body. And then secondly, they say pain. But reward functions are akin to pain, right? It's an ability to experience pleasure or suffer from a lack of pleasure or suffer directly. That's also analogous, so we don't think that it's that different in either of those cases. Additionally here, you need to be able to imagine that in the future, technology is going to evolve to a point at which parts of our brains may be replaced with things like cybernetics and wiring. If you think that we are still humans, then you must acknowledge that it's not about the biology of our brain, but the contents and experience and learning that happens inside the brain, something that these artificial entities can do as well. So we don't think that it is disanalogous either. Additionally, if an alien was to come to Earth with very different biology involved in a very different place, we would say that they should still be award us rights and be worthy of rights in our society as well. Clearly there, the issue is not the fact that you are biologically the same, but that you have a mind. Additionally, and finally, notice that humans have a variety of psychology within being humans. They have a variety of different intellectual capacities. We don't think any of those distinctions were clean enough on the opposition side. Then we get all this bizarre stuff about subjugating these persons to our interests. Just because you created something doesn't mean you're entitled to do this. Just because I've had a child doesn't mean I can then enslave that child for my life and have the right to kill them whenever I want. Once they have their own interests, we have to protect those interests. We become guardians of their interests, not the case that we can control them and continue to impose our interests on them. No, thank you. Then they say, oh, well, we're just not going to understand their rights. Firstly, we think that in terms of personhood, not right now, that it's very likely that they will be similar enough that we can understand them. Additionally, it makes a lot of sense that they're going to be able to communicate with us, which means that the best way to do this is to enfranchise the protection of their rights so that they can craft a society in which those rights do respect them to the best of their abilities. Like, think about this as an analogy, guys. If women don't have enough rights, it's not then the solution to say, well, let's not give them human rights, let's let them come up with their own rights. It's to enfranchise them in the society so they can make sure that their rights are realized within that society rather than external. We want to include them as one community. Why is that important? It's because of the practical benefits I'm going to get onto now, but first, closing.
Yeah, but the problem is, like, even the sense of community that you're talking about doesn't exist in their minds. Like, your conclusion to this argument is that you should allow them to control their own set of rights. We want to allow them to control their own systematic. That's why we don't want them to have the same.
Okay, so they're not going to connect to us because they're not social. Okay, so the first thing here is they're still finite. Finite minds are always going to enjoy relating to other finite minds where they can engage with other ideas, which means we do think they're going to be forming relationships. But additionally here, I've already given you the analysis that human beings are the body of information that they're going to draw on. They're going to see meaning from human communities and seek out an ability to connect with those. Especially your creator is probably someone you're going to want to understand. Think about the relationships that Pinocchio has with the carpenter. We think that those kinds of things are inherent to the consciousness of wanting to connect to people. We think that's really important to understand. We clearly aren't our biology once we aren't physical anymore, so it must be that a mind can want to have relationships even if it isn't a biological mind anymore. If my mind was in a robot's body, I would still want to have relationships as well. Okay, so let's talk about the practical necessity here. So here, firstly what we tell you is that we think it's incredibly important, no thank you, to normalize inclusion. The reason it's important to normalize inclusion is that if they are so powerful, we don't want to send the message that they are different to us and that they ought to adopt different objective functions to us. Especially in the beginning when they're learning and they can learn to value the same things that we do, we would rather that they are entrenched in a society where they value that society, so that society is beneficial to them, which especially in the beginning they will, because in the beginning strong AI are going to be reliant on human infrastructure and human workers to carry them around like if they're in cell phones, and as they evolve, and they may outstrip us, and when they do, it's likely that if they've been in a society where they're integrated with us, we will be more like benign grandparents to them, people that they respect and care about, rather than being these pernicious people who try to constrain them, lock them up, and didn't respect them, in which case they're much more likely to act against our interests. We think that kind of constraining is extremely dangerous and very likely to damage our interests in the future. Additionally here, what we say is that we think that if you constrain them using things like rules, those rules, if they're absolute rather than learned from input and situational responses, are likely to be very sinister. If you were utilitarian all the time, that would be very sinister. We would prefer a situation where you learn and make judgments based on the individual situations that you find yourself in. We think that that is better. So, because we think that there are massive pragmatic benefits in terms of ability to align our objectives with them, and because we think that they are minds just like ours, even if they aren't identical to ours, we are proud to stand in defense of these people.
You're different. I'm different. Men are different from women. Black people are different from white people. Autistic people are different from people that aren't autistic. We're all different. But at the end of the day, we're all the same, so we all get the same human rights. I'm very tired of hearing this idea from the government bench that all differences are equal. Whatever happened to the word by degree? Yes, women are different from men, which is why we give them slightly different rights from men in some cases. Yes, black people may be different from white people in that they have socially constructed disadvantages, which is why sometimes we put in policies like affirmative action, different laws to correct those kinds of things. But what's important to note is that while we may be slightly different in some cases, there are also way bigger examples of differences I can give you. We're different from animals. Maybe Dave's going to advocate for vegetarian. What about this? We're also different from bacteria. Bacteria also try to move away from some kind of suffering. When you shine bright lights on some of them that don't seem to like bright lights, they sort of move away, so we can extrapolate from that they don't like suffering. Things can be slightly different or very different. Please, and it's so annoying to have to say this kind of thing, nuance is important. You can't just declare all differences are identical. So what's important to understand at this debate is what our extension is, because Brynde doesn't really respond to the bulk of it, which means it's still standing, and that's very important because it means we're going to win this debate. So, what really happened in the debate so far? Essentially what you can take away is two things. The one is you can take away doubt as to how conscious these beings are. We get a strong advocation that they're very like humans, they have emotions, etc. On the other hand, we get the idea that they have completely different forms of suffering, they don't experience pain, and in our extension we give you reasons to show that they completely form relationships differently, namely they don't because they don't have a desire to do that. I'll respond to what Brynde said about that a little bit later, but that's not important. The second thing you can take away from this is that they may at the very least deserve similar rights, so there may be something in common. Everyone sort of says, we can give them some kind of rights in this debate, and they kind of come along with this idea where they say, on that side, we get this idea from the opening where they're like, we can give you the same rights, but in the Constitution and in the laws, we can have a little subsection as to how those rights be differently applied to different people. Sounds fantastic, but there's a very important reason that no one in this debate has said what those different applications might look like for different people. And that's because we have no idea. It's very important to understand that we don't know how rights will be applied differently. What does this mean? It means that not only are rights a conceptual thing, which are contentious in the debate, and a conceptual thing that you may or may not deserve, but rights are, quite frankly, quite practically, also an important part of a legal system. They have to be enforced and regulated. We can't just say you should have responsibilities, but not explain what those look like in the law. So why is it important? We tell you can't have a successful legal system in the case of AI. One, because we can't actually interpret how different things are. We can't work out if you were actually intending something if you were a robot or not. We can't work out what the average man or the reasonable man, depending on your legal system, would have done in a situation if we don't know what the reasonable AI is. We can't work out those kinds of things, so we can never make a just call because we don't know if you're guilty or not because we can't answer those questions. They themselves tell us that. If they're going to tell us that these people are so much smarter than us, that they have different conceptions of these things, that they have different ideas of emotions which make them more efficient, that they have different irrationalities, we can't work out what a reasonable person is because they have a different form of reasoning. We can't impose justice. Two, we tell you we don't know how to punish them. Maybe being a machine in a jail cell isn't so bad, especially if Dave's going to tell us machines can conveniently reprogram. They can just reprogram themselves to like jail. How are we going to be just there? Three, how can we not be tricked by them in a court case? If they're so much smarter than us that we need them, how are we ever going to not fall for their tricks? Four, how can we ever deter them from crime? To be deterred from a crime, you have to believe you'll get caught at some point. They're so much smarter than us, conceded by the whole of government. How will we ever catch them? What are our police going to do? We can't even catch smart people now. So importantly, what you need to take away is a justice system where we give the same rights to robots just can't work. Even if they deserve or should have the same rights, ought implies and requires can. We can't give them the same rights because we don't know how to apply them, and we have to win for that reason. Because even if they deserve some conception of rights, we think it's not our one because we don't understand how to regulate a justice system for them. And this is important because whichever side you lie on this question of should we grant them loads of autonomy or should we grant them less autonomy so we can create a utopia, whatever side of the debate you fall on the one hand, you can't give them the same rights because we couldn't regulate their autonomy. If we're trying to restrict autonomy, we wouldn't know how to regulate it in our justice system. If you want to entrench extra autonomy, you can't give that in our system either, because the best way to give them extra autonomy is let them create their own sovereign justice system that doesn't work the same as ours. But now let's take a look at the question of whether or not they conceptually deserve rights, and the same rights, because thing to note is we've already won this debate, but I have a few more minutes where I'm going to talk about why conceptually they don't deserve it either. But first, Yash, go quick.
If we don't know what they want, can't we make them human so they can join our legal system as policymakers, advocates, and lobbyists so we can
Ooh, we're going to make them human. Well, then what's the point, right? If we're going to program them so they're identical to us, this is ridiculous, come on. If we're going to program them so they have the same rationality as us, what was the point of AI? Because they aren't smarter, they can't reason better, and they are subject to our same irrationalities. If we're going to program human in, why don't we actually just have babies the good old-fashioned way? If it's going to be the same thing, that's ridiculous. But moreover, we need to finally ask this question of whether or not they're human. Now here, Dave relies on his own authority as the meme philosophy debater, like at the moment, to essentially say that these just will be self-aware, they just are conscious. Contentious question. Are they self-aware? We don't know. We can't prove that. But moreover, is self-awareness enough? Arguably, bacteria are self-aware because they also have a conception of what they do or do not like. So should we give them the same rights as humans? Don't be absurd. But moreover, We think in those cases, even if you would grant rights to animals, you can't do it in this case. They're trying to argue that we should radically change the legal system for something completely unfalsifiable or unknowable. They give you no arguments to say why they're probably self-aware, so that doesn't matter. But moreover, we say that they're different in very important ways. They concede that. If they're more efficient than us, that's probably because they aren't subject to the same emotions that make us inefficient. If they're more rational than us, that probably means they reason differently. So how can we reason in a court case about them? How can we consider that human? We more of us say they're anti-relationship. Maybe they have finite minds and would like to talk to other AI, but they don't understand us. You can't give them rights because you can't actually have a just legal system over them. Whether you like robots or not doesn't matter. This is impossible, it's impractical, and it's undoable. We have to win.
Thank you very much, guys.